And we're live.
Welcome to the CLE group chat. Today is September 16th, 2017, and my name is Joshua. With us, we have Jeannie from Australia, Donna from Indiana, and also from Indiana, we have Christopher, who started this ministry. Now, we're only allowing our church group to be on this video call, but you can still watch and use the live chat and share this video with family and friends to watch it with you live if you want. And if you're watching a recording of this and prefer to watch it as it happens, make sure you're subscribed and click the bell, and that should let you know when we're live so you can chat with other live viewers during the broadcast. Now, without further ado, we have an article from NBC News titled, "Google Hit with Gender Pay Discrimination Lawsuit." Google, which is already under federal investigation over claims of unfair pay practices, has been sued by 3 former employees who allege that the company pays women less than men for similar work. The lawsuit, which was filed Thursday in California Superior Court in San Francisco by Kelly Ellis, Holly Peace, and Kelly Wisery, is seeking class action status to cover women who have worked at Google over the past 4 years. Google has discriminated and continues to discriminate against its female employees by systematically paying them lower compensation than Google pays male employees performing substantially similar work under similar working conditions, the complaint reads.
Similar work, similar working conditions, similar work, similar working conditions, similar. Does anybody have any specifics? Does anybody have any details of what this work was or what was done or how many hours were worked or anything? Or are they just, oh, we're just going to state vague statements and Google, we're angry, so give us money?
Gina Shiano, a spokesman for Google, said in a statement that the company works really hard to create a great workplace for everyone and to give everyone the chance to thrive here. In relation to this particular lawsuit, we will review it in detail, but we disagree with the central allegations. Job levels and promotions are determined through rigorous hiring and promotion committees and must pass multiple levels of review, including checks, to make sure there is no gender bias in the decisions, she said. And we have extensively systems in place to ensure that we pay fairly. Extensive systems in place, yeah.
You know, there was I heard rumors around town. I think it's true. I don't know. I've not really been in there to actually check it out, but there's a movie theater in a town like 10 miles out from where we live. And as far as I know, the guy who owns it will only hire women to work there. He refuses to hire men. The weird thing about it is that there are not men with picket signs taking their tops off and standing topless out front of the movie theater, like big burly construction workers saying, "We want fair work, fair pay, whatever." You know, that doesn't happen. Men don't get these things. But even then, we're being specific as to what it is. They were refusing to hire. Google's hired women, and to do what sort of work is really the question. What I suspect has happened, and I'll just give you my theory since they're not going to give us any details that we can actually judge the matter righteously. Let me give you what they probably did. They went over to, okay, here's the financial transactions Google had for payments made to male employees and female employees. They went to the total amount for both men and women, looked at them, and found that men made more than women. Total. Without calculating, as I pointed out in the feminist teaching, without calculating maternity leave, sick days, overtime, or any of those various things which women tend to use, like women tend to stay away from overtime, tend more to part-time, tend to take more sick leave, tend to take more things like maternity leave and vacation days than men do. See, men can get things like, oh, here, you can take this sick leave, but if it's unpaid, he doesn't want to take it. Even if he's sick, he struggles out and goes to work because he's got a family to feed. Whereas the women can just say, oh, well, the government can give me proper compensation and Google can just pay me extra. So, you know, I can just take as much as I want because I'm a feminist. I don't have to take responsibility for anything I say and do. That's probably what they've done. And that's probably why we're not getting any specifics here of what exactly they calculated.
There's a wonderful book out there called Feminism, Castrating America by our Chris Johnson. Who else? And it talks about this exact subject.
Mm-hmm. And the article continues. Shiano said that if discrepancies or problems are noticed during a review process, Google's team strives to fix them to ensure that everybody is treated fairly. Google is under investigation by the U.S. Labor Department over claims that it didn't fairly pay some female employees. The allegations stem from a January lawsuit in which the Labor Department asked Google to hand over compensation data. In an April blog post, Eileen Naughton, Google's vice president of people operations, wrote that the company was quite surprised at the allegations and that they came without any supporting data or methodology.
What did I just tell you? That's probably what they did. Well, actually, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Because based on what she just said, they came out without any supporting data. I'm wondering if it's a bunch of girls that got together, started gossiping, talking about the issue, and just decide to push it through without any kind of verification. They may have heard a rumor or some other thing where somebody got, maybe there was one of the guys that got bonus pay and the girls didn't get bonus pay because he worked his tail off, working maybe extra overtime hours per week and putting in more and working on more projects than the girls did. And then they got jealous and they said, we didn't do anything at all. We ought to get paid that bonus too for doing nothing because we're women, because male privilege. That's why. That doesn't make any sense. So if they came without any supporting data, see, I was even giving them the benefit of the doubt to say they went and got the overall average numbers for the year and then didn't bother to do any other investigation beside that. I think I gave them too much credit.
Well, and you know how many companies are now having people sign upon hiring a non-disclosure agreement where they can't tell anybody how much they make and they're not allowed to talk about it. And this is exactly why, because a bunch of feminist women get a bee in their bonnet because they happen to know how much the man in the next cubicle is making.
Yeah. But the problem is it's not about whether knowing how much he makes, but okay, like for example, I gave an example when I did the teachings on feminism that I had one of my first jobs I ever had working in a restaurant. It took me a while, but I found out through the grapevine that there was a woman who was hired in. She was a single mother. She was hired in doing the same exact job I was doing. She worked at it was a fast food restaurant, worked at a drive-through window, and I found out she made $1 more than the hour than I did. Now I had more work experience there. I had gone through more training there, and she got hired in $1 an hour on the more on the hour than I did. And I was wondering why. Never got an answer. I asked for a raise to get compensated to what she got paid. I got told no, and nobody whined and crined about me not getting paid what I was fairly or anything like that. But you see, she was a woman, and because of male privilege, because there's no such thing as female privilege, but because of male privilege, she got to get paid more than the men. Because of male privilege. Because of male privilege. Because of male privilege, the men make less. I'm sorry, I think like a fuse popped in my brain or something. I can't figure that out.
It continues. The 3 women who no longer work at Google allege in the lawsuit that they were paid less than the male coworkers for doing similar work and were placed on lower job ladders, leading them to miss out on opportunities for promotions, bigger bonuses, and raises.
Wait, opportunities? They didn't have equal opportunity to get those bonuses. Well, by equal opportunity, does that mean, okay, let me paint a picture here, all right? There's a project coming up. All right, they're working on some sort of, you know, Google YouTube fusion thing that they're doing, okay? And they need extra help for this, to which they're going to pay bonuses or overtime work, because I'm assuming a lot of these people probably get salaries, so they're probably paying bonuses, because a lot of the salary stuff they don't do overtime, but they'll pay them bonuses and compensation to do extra work beyond their normal tasks. And so the men jump in to do it, but one of the women, she's pregnant and she has to take maternity leave. Well, she can't be there to work on the project, so she can't get the bonus. Do you see the problem here? They don't calculate that, you know, when you're having a baby, you can't work efficiently while you're having a baby before and after the actual event. And that's why, I mean, God designed this kind of system to where women can stay home and build the nest and protect the home while the men go out and bring in the resources for the home. Like, I know that, call me old-fashioned, but don't dare call me logical, because that would be, you know, you can't say that. You can't say it's just reasonable that that's the way it's supposed to be. You can't say it's reasonable that men can't breastfeed. I mean, that's not reasonable, or we can't think about that or anything, of why women have to stay home and can't work on these special projects to get these extra bonuses. They don't consider these factors. And folks, I've known, and look, I know some women don't like talking about it, I know, but I've known women who have taken sick leave for menstrual cramps and things like that. Men don't have the same problems. So men have opportunity to work more. Okay, that's just the bottom line fact. And I'm not saying that women cannot work as much as a man can. In fact, there are many jobs where women can, but they make different life choices and they choose not to. That's the difference between men and women right there. That, if you want to know if there's any wage gap, the only reason there's a wage gap is because women make different life choices than men. That's it.
Ellis, who graduated in 2006, was hired 4 years later as a software engineer, a few weeks before a male coworker with the same level of experience also joined her team. Despite their having similar experience and having started around the same time, the complaint alleges the male employee was placed on a level 4 software engineering ladder, earning him more pay opportunities. Ellis, who got excellent performance reviews, was rung below on level 3, according to the complaint.
So you've got one spot open. That means any company that has one position open better give it to the woman or you're going to get a lawsuit. Boy, there's no female privilege written all over that one, is there? Perhaps there's a reason why they chose him. Did she bother to ask them? Did anybody bother to report and Google give a statement of why they chose this male employee over the female employee to take this level 4 position?
No.
And she said similar experience, not the same experience. Okay? And that's saying the same experience is a whole different ballgame than similar experience. I don't know if I could give an example or not, but you could say that, all right, how do I put this? Somebody gets, there's 2 spots open in the produce section at a local grocery store, and 2 people are going after the jobs. There's a male and a female, but one is like a supervisor position and the other is a you know, just a normal employee. You know, you're stocking and you're doing stuff like that. All right, and they choose what they seek out their experiences. They have similar experience. It shows on their like what do you call the resume, right? Their resume, they both have 2 years experience, but they chose the man because he has 2 years experience as a grocery store and the woman has 2 years experience running a lemonade stand. Now they have similar experience because they were both selling fruits or vegetables or whatever. They were both in the sales department, but even though there's similarity in the experience, it's not the same experience. And that's the point. So when they say, watch those words, when they say similar experience, you need the details or you can't judge it. And what they want you to do is say, oh, poor woman, she just got left out without even knowing any of the details of what actually happened. So basically, if women don't get the top level positions over men, feminists complain, and apparently that justifies a lawsuit of how many X millions of dollars that any company has to pay if they dare refuse a woman the top level positions for whatever reason.
Missouri was brought on in a level 2 sales role, while she saw men with comparable experience being brought in at a higher level, at which they could earn more commission, the suit alleges. Peace, who joined Google with a decade of experience as a network engineer, oversaw technical staff. However, she wasn't considered a technical employee, so her pay was limited by remaining on the business systems career ladder, the suit says. Google's motto is to do no harm, but it has harmed its women employees by not treating them as well as it treats male employees. It is time for that to stop, James M. Finberg, an attorney for the plaintiffs, said in a statement. The lawsuit, which seeks back pay and compensation, including wages, stock, and bonuses, and an order that Google change its policies, comes 1 month after James Damore, then employed as a Google engineer, posted a 10-page document on internal message boards that was leaked to the media and was given the name the Google Manifesto. Damore claimed in the essay to explain why more women aren't in engineering positions, chalking the disparity up to biological differences and advancing generalizations that women don't tend to handle stress well and are more neurotic.
No, wait, who said that?
Damore.
Who's again?
He was fired because
he was fired.
Yeah, he was fired because he was trying to explain why. He said Damore claimed in the essay to explain why more women aren't in engineering positions.
No, because I'm sitting here listening to this, I was like, everything he said was true. Everything was absolutely true. He got fired for telling the truth. Didn't I just I thought I did a teaching last week in which I mentioned that, if you're going to, you trust God and you say what is correct and truthful, you don't lie to save your job. If that's what they're telling you, you lie or you lose your job, well then lose your job because it's not worth it. I thought I was just talking about that last week. Or maybe I was talking about it like one of the Bible studies we did this past week or something. But anyway, the thing is, everything he said was absolutely correct. It was accurate. It was purely on point. Women don't choose those jobs because they hate them. Most women don't want to be engineers. Just like I've talked, most women don't want to be chess masters. Most women don't want to be garbage truck drivers, and they don't want to work in sewage, and they don't want to have to climb high-rise buildings and risk their lives to do it. Women don't want to do this stuff. That's why there's not very many women in the field. And that's why they don't get hired to these positions as much, is because they typically don't. I mean, engineering positions requires a lot of dedication, a lot. The average person who hasn't done one of those jobs doesn't understand. Now, I've not even had an engineering job before. I mean, technically, well, I've done like freelance coding work a little bit, some for, a company before. But outside of that, I've never had a real engineering job, but I do engineering all the time. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, an engineering job, I don't know that I would even want that because they're tough. You've got to meet deadlines. It's entire amounts of stress. Like if you're coding engineering or whether you're doing biochemical engineering, whatever it is, there is a ton of stuff to do. It's very intricate. It requires a lot of focus, a lot of dedication, and women typically don't want to do that. They want to go home and be with their families. They want to be with their babies and raise their children and be with their family and talk with their mothers and sisters and different things. They want to go do those things. Women do typically want to just do that stuff. They don't want to have to dedicate like men do, and men will do it because they're like, I'm doing it not just because this is my job to do it, but also because I have to provide for my family this way, because if he doesn't provide for his family, there's not going to be some little godmother government fairy come in and just give him everything that he wants. Okay, he's going to be solely responsible for that. The woman's not just going to come in and say, don't worry, honey, it doesn't matter if you couldn't make in that engineering career, I'm going to pick up and provide for the family. Women don't do that, okay, generally. I'm not saying that it never happens, but generally that's not the way things go. And on top of that, I mean, just because if women are bearing children, they've got to raise the family. They've got to do that stuff. So the men are fiscally responsible for those things. That's the pressure that's put on them. And that's what society typically ignores. But men will go after those high-paying jobs, even if they hate them. They will go after them and do them. Men do stuff they hate all the time. It happens, okay? And so these jobs that are high-paying, they pay higher because they are harder to do. The highest-paying stuff is, I mean, even people say, yeah, but, you know, people like, you know, Donald Trump will own a business and he's really high-paid. Do you even have an understanding of what it took for him to get there? If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Another problem is, you know, like you've pointed out before, is that a lot of these are single mothers and they want the same pay, but they don't have the time because they've got to go home and take care of their kids or pay for childcare.
What happens is that at the end of the day,
they don't have somebody else. They don't have somebody at home to take care of the kids like men with wives do.
So what happens at the end of the day is that they all, you know, the men are like, man, we got this project. We got to hang over. We got to get this done. And she's like, I can't. I got 2 kids at home. Bye. And then the men are left over doing that extra work. But then the women feel like, but I should be getting all that extra bonus that he is. Like, say Google said, okay, for this office floor, we have $3,000 extra bonus and we need to choose who to give it to. Well, it looks like all these men, wow, they put in probably 200 more hours than the women did, you know, by working all this overtime every week. Well, it looks like we're just going to split it evenly between everybody. It's almost like I wish I could go into public school classrooms and teach this. What we should do is get together some of these girls, because remember how I talked about in the public school classrooms, it's really the grades are not an assessment of education, it's a psychological assessment. How feminine can you act based on what grade do you get? So what we need to do is pull the, you know, top 3 girls, you know, in the class, they got their A's and they said, wow, you got their A's, and see some of those boys, they got C's and D's down there. I think what we're going to do for the overall grade, we're just going to average everybody out at a B-, and you're all getting a B-. Because that's the way of feminism. That's the way of Black Lives Matter. And that's the way of all these little social political smurfs who run around preaching this stuff all day. That's the way they operate. That's the way they think things ought to be done. So if you teach that to students and say, okay, are you guys okay with everybody getting a B-? Well, all the people that didn't do much, they're just like, yeah, that'd be great. But all the people that worked hard said, no, wait, that's not fair. Why is that not fair? You mean the people who did the work ought to get the reward for what they did? Are you kidding? But they can't even teach that in a basic public school. That's why they get out of the public school system and think they should have everything handed to them. It's ridiculous. They go into college and they're taught the same exact thing. That's why all these protests are going on in colleges all over the place. But then once they get out of college, they go get a real job where 60% of them or more, there's about 2/3 that don't actually get a job in their field. They have to go back and work some lower level job just to try to make ends meet. And they realize, wow, this is not all peaches and cream like the world told me. And I actually have to work to get what I want. Maybe. And then by their 30s, when some of these women, they really, really want a baby and their biological clock starts ticking, and they're like, maybe I was lied to all this time. And you know, it'd be really great if a man were providing for me and I could just stay home and raise a family. That's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that earlier? Why did I think of that 10 years ago when I was a lot younger and had more vitality and stamina to raise a family? That would have been brilliant. I'm going to let Josh continue, or I'll keep going.
Damore was fired, but he told NBC News last month that he was only trying to make a point. I'm not just attacking diversity, I'm just attacking the fact that we can't honestly discuss any of these issues, and that is actually hurting the problem, he said. Google Chief Executive Sundar Pichai told employees last month in an email that parts of the so-called manifesto violated Google's code of conduct and crossed the line by advancing gender stereotypes in the workplace. And that's the end of the article.
Also pointed out that if you're in a hallway and a female passes you, must bow the knee.
So the next article, an article from Outbreak News Today titled "Medical Marijuana Few medical schools training students. Although 29 states and the District of Columbia allow marijuana use for medical purposes, few medical students are being trained how to prescribe the drug.
Hey, I'm sorry, before you continue on that, I wanted to read something real quick. Kevin wrote. He's our biochemical engineer in our church, and he was saying that he was they had a female apprentice, is what he was saying on here, who their company he was working for took in, and they were doing a lot of like rock crushing with heavy machinery, heavy earth moving and things like that. And they took I mean, very rare to have a female be involved in this, but they took on a female apprentice, and he said she turned up to work sometimes until she just finally just didn't turn up anymore at all. This is the reality, folks. This is the reality, because women make different life choices. She went to this job and said, I don't want anything to do with this, but I'm a feminist, I'm going to show these men, and then just disappears. Now, that's kind of typical. And it's not wrong. Ladies, listen, it is not wrong for you to make different life choices. God designed you differently. It's good that you make a choice that you want to raise a family, or you want to do things, feminine things that females do, okay? There's a reason they made male and female. God made male and female differently, is so they could complete different tasks and different roles, and that they would have a desire to do those tasks. Because it would be horrible if men and women were forced to do the opposite roles all the time, things that they hate. At least God put in them desires, to that way they would have a more pleasant feeling at accomplishing the things, the tasks that need to be done in those respective roles. So I'm not making fun of women for doing that. What I'm making fun of are these feminists who are willingly blind to the reality that's right in front of us. When God says that he gives them over to reprobate mind, that's a sinful mind, okay? That's somebody who's given over to sin, to their wickedness, to their fornication, the lesbians, the lust, all that stuff. He says, I give them over to the reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Read Romans chapter 1, okay? It's to do those things which are not convenient. It's not convenient for women to come in and do all this stuff and try to cause all these problems, but they do it because they're given over to reprobate mind. That's the problem. It's the sin.
Researchers at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis surveyed medical school deans, residents, and fellows and examined a curriculum database maintained by the Association of American Medical College, AAMC, learning that medical marijuana is not being addressed in medical education. Their findings are available online in the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence. Medical education needs to...
They should have a class in the college called The Science of Sorcery 101. And just to clarify for everybody who didn't understand what I was saying, is that drugs in general, including marijuana, all of it in the Bible is classified under sorcery. That's where that, and if you want to say, well, where does the Bible condemn drugs or condemn smoking? It's classified under sorcery. That's where you find it. So anything in the Bible that talks about sorcery being an abomination in the sight of God, that's what it's talking about. So, I mean, that's where they're saying, well, we need to study this more. Yeah, let's have Science of Sorcery 101.
Chris, I really do understand where you're coming from. However, I have actually made a point recently of beginning to study the different constituents found in hemp and cannabis plants. And what those constituents can actually do for people are truly amazing. However, I personally know several people that have tried to smoke it for medical reasons, and they can't stand to smoke it. But there are tinctures available, there's oils available made from the cannabis plant that are extremely beneficial.
Well, I'm not saying that there's no beneficial in like having oils or things like that. The Bible even supports using oils and other stuff like that. There's nowhere in the Bible that supports smoking anything, period. If people want to argue that, and they would say, oh, well, this works for this particular thing. Look, witchcraft works. There's a lot of sinful stuff that works, but just because it works doesn't make it right. And so I'm not saying that hemp doesn't have a purpose. Hemp has tons of really good purposes. That's why it was basically outlawed in this country, is because of all the, I mean, incredible things you can do from hemp. You'll have to research sometime, if nobody ever done it, about the hemp material that they're making that was actually harder than concrete. You can make entire hemp vehicles out of this stuff. Absolutely amazing. Very lightweight, harder than concrete when you concentrate the form down. I've read all sorts of stuff about these kind of amazing things you could do with it. And people make hemp clothes. They make all sorts of medical stuff out of hemp. Hemp actually, hemp seeds has some of the same qualities of B17 that's found in apricots. It's not a highest concentrate, but it has some of those nitrilicides and things like that in them. So there's tons of benefits to natural consumption, to oils and things like that. But smoking, no, that's along the lines of sorcery. That would be classified as that under the Bible, simply because, I mean, again, the type of things that people are inhaling to their lungs, they have to be you got to be careful about a lot of times. And so that's, I mean, I don't know if we want to discuss that issue or not, or I don't know. I feel like I'm leaving it hanging, but I'll stop.
The article continues. Medical education needs to catch up to marijuana legislation, said senior author Laura Jean Beirut, MD, the alumni endowed professor of psychiatry at Washington University and a member of the National Advisory Council on Drug Abuse. Physicians in training need to know the benefits and drawbacks associated with medical marijuana so they know when or if or to whom to prescribe the drug. Doctors are being asked to guide patients through areas in which most have no training, she explained.
And you see, the thing is, I got to point out something, is that people will, when I talk about the sorcery problem and I condemn that, I know exactly what generally people will say, because I've heard this kind of stuff before, is they'll come back and say, well, you're condemning all these people who are using it for medicinal purposes. Name me a medicinal use for marijuana that is not self-induced. A medical condition that has not been self-induced that medical marijuana is used for.
Okay, one of them is catastrophic seizures. They have very successfully used medical marijuana to treat major seizure disorders.
Okay, and the seizure disorders came from what?
It depends. Some people are born with them and they don't know why they have them. Other people have had head injuries that are no fault of their own, and medical marijuana can help reverse that.
So can hyperbaric oxygen, without having to take drugs to smoke anything. Hyperbaric oxygen can do better and actually cure it for the long term. It's not just some sort of short term stuff like this medical marijuana.
Yeah, but how many people can gain access to hyperbaric oxygen? You know what I'm saying? Like right
so people ought to get on that. I mean, people really ought to get on that and start and quit diverting all this money into marijuana and take all that money and divert it in hyperbaric oxygen. And then we can solve the problem.
Well, and I agree that the hyperbaric oxygen is a great alternative. However, like people like me, I can't access hyperbaric oxygen. I wish I could.
That doesn't necessarily give us like, okay, let's go smoke marijuana. That's not a justification.
Like I said, I personally could never smoke it, and I know several people that have tried it and said no, that I can't smoke it. But there are other ways to use medicinal marijuana besides smoking it.
Well, I mean, there might be other ways to use it, like we were talking about, and even with hemp, that's a totally different subject from marijuana. I would consider those two completely different things. I mean,
it's the same plant.
The what?
Genetically, it's the same plant. There are derivatives of hemp that have less THC, which is one of the constituents that gives people that quote unquote high. But it's basically the same plant.
But they're genetic derivatives, right? They're genetically, like they've bred them for certain purposes. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yes, to a point. But like I said, what we call hemp and what we call cannabis are basically the same plant.
Well, I mean, that would be like, where is Lorraine when I need her? Taking two different types of fruits that are actually the same Or that's like saying, okay, onions and garlic, it's the same plant, but used for two distinct purposes, two very, very different and distinct purposes. So it's like saying the same thing on that, because there's a lot of different plants that are the same kind, but when you get to a different variety and you start using them in different ways, that's the problem. Okay, it's not the plants themselves that are evil. I'm not arguing that fact. But if we're going to sit here and argue that smoking them is good, I can't find any scripture to back that up, not one. And so I can't even I can't sit here and endorse that people should be doing that kind of stuff. And again, I would still classify it under sorcery, because I mean the same thing is people say, well, if you're not getting high with it, how could you say that it's sorcery? The same thing is that alchemy would be considered sorcery. What the alchemists were trying to do, it's the same kind of stuff. But the problem is where the difference of when you're just using natural stuff of concentrated, naturally growing things to consume or to rub on, like with oils and things like that, stuff that actually be backed up in scripture. And then you have other processes and other methods that can't be backed up in scripture that the people were not doing, who were living righteously and doing what was right. They were not doing those things, and God condemns that stuff. So if somebody says, well, this is what I use it for and I don't know what else to do, I still tell people, do what's right. Live righteously. Don't run off into other stuff and experimental things that other people tell you is good for it. Because just like I said, I mean, just like as somebody, or I think it was Steve, he's in our chat right now, he very accurately pointed out, he says, there's a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Because it's not just the physical properties, because we're always analyzing, well, is this physically good for us? Is it physically good for us? What about the spirit? What about the soul? What is going on outside of that? What do these things lead to in a spiritual matter? We see that I can't even tell you, because I can't see into that. Thank God that I can't. But that kind of stuff obviously would have certain implications onto the spiritual life. And that's what can really corrupt us. That kind of stuff is what leads us to those different conditions like Tanya was mentioning in the first place, is that when you have a parent who is living unrighteously, and then they have a child, and that child lives unrighteously, and they have another child, they come out with all these different impairments. And then people say, well, we don't know what it is. It must be genetic of some sort. Well, yeah, I agree. It was passed down. That kind of stuff could even pass down because the grandparents were not eating right, the parents were not eating right, and then the child turns out really poorly because of all the horrible diets. Because technically, I mean, I heard this said a few weeks ago. I remember reading some article that I saw. I looked at it because I was like, that's an interesting way to phrase it. They said, you are what your grandparents ate. And that's true. You are. You're really made up of what your grandparents ate. So if they were eating junk and then your parents ate the junk, then guess what you're made of? And that's why you'll see some people are born and they tend to be fat a lot more naturally than other people. And that's because they have come through a line of people who have just eaten and done horrible things to their body. It's not just what they ate, other things they would do, whether they would drink alcohol, whether they would smoke things, whatever it is they were intaking into themselves. In addition, with all the other wicked stuff they probably did and other diseases they may have gotten and attributed from other things, whether it's fornication, adultery, there's tons of stuff that we don't get to see that happened in our parents' lives or grandparents' lives of why we have these mental problems or other stuff like that in the first place. And so Jesus Christ, he was healing people of all these impairments because they had been handed stuff, all this wickedness had been handed down generation to generation, and they had tons and tons of people with all these infirmities that couldn't be healed, and he came through and healed them and had mercy on them. So the thing is, I just can't say that we ought to be, to sit here and justify the smoking of such things. And I still believe that's classified under sorcery in the Bible.
And I can agree with you to a point, Chris. The thing that people don't realize about cannabis is it's actually an herb. And yes, has it ever been misused? Yes. But so have many other herbs. So why is this one particular herb being set apart as a problem?
That goes into the history of hemp, though. Hemp was attacked because of all of its major uses. There was a time in this country that taxes were paid by hemp farmers. Hemp was so valuable, they would actually gather it up and use it to pay their taxes. And it was accepted at a certain time in this country. A lot of people don't realize that because they don't even know that's where our history was. hemp can be used for just about anything. The problem is that when people started realizing that you could break it down and that you could, concentrate it. You could concentrate in a certain way and come up with all sorts of really amazing materials out of this stuff. It was harming the things like the steel industry. It was harming other textile factories and things like that. People who owned big business, it was going to harm their businesses. So if they can lobby the government to make it illegal under any circumstance, just make up an excuse, then use the media to tell everybody what's going on. Like, okay, hey guys, you can smoke this, and guess what? It's causing whites and blacks to interracially marry, because that's what they used to threaten. I've seen some of the old things, old videos and things like that they used to publish to warn people, oh, look, if you let your children smoke this stuff, they're going to start being friends. Whites will be friends with blacks, and oh, what a horrible thing. That's what they did. And so people started getting this idea that was horrible, because there were people who were misusing certain things. And you're right, there's tons of stuff, tons of food that has been misused. Do you know how many times eggs have been misused? Eggs are amazing. Eggs are wonderful things. But when you throw them at people's houses, they're not so wonderful anymore. Okay, so people misuse stuff all the time. I get that. But to try to, and like I said, the smoking of it, though, would be the misuse of it. That would be an offense toward God. But to use it for other of its natural uses that we should be able to use it for, which could be justified by Scripture. There's all sorts of uses they had for things, okay? Even for sweet-smelling aromas and all sorts of things like that, okay? But if we're going to try to justify something that's not verified in Scripture like that, then we're getting into the realm of, okay, you know, what's the spiritual offense toward God, and how many other things, other problems can it cause? You know, you might say, oh, well, it might fix this one thing, but that doesn't make it right, and that was my point.
Okay.
You know, another thing, though, people don't realize, well, see, a lot of the problem with all of this natural stuff is it can't be patented. You cannot patent a natural product. However, the US government does have a patent on marijuana. And not many people realize that.
And, you know, yes, I hear what you're saying there, Jeannie. And Chris, let's just set the smoking of it aside for a minute and just simply look at the other uses. I think you're absolutely right. That's why we don't have access to it, because all of a sudden there were all these uses for this amazing herb, and it's very healing. I know that firsthand. I'm not going to get into that today, but I know firsthand how healing that can be. And, you know, people don't, I really think that these doctors don't want us to get well, and doctors don't get training in herbology anyway. So why is this such a big deal? Well, that's why, because this is a very healing herb that has many, many uses. And of course, they're not going to train our medical doctors on how to use it.
And that was the point I was making too, is like even people can still buy hemp seeds. You can eat those, and they're really good for you. They're very good for you. In fact, I've had hemp seed granola bars. I had some people hand me some of those times. They're really good, and they're very good for you. So there's stuff like that that goes on. But there's somebody in the chat that was asking about finding Bible verses that conclude some of the stuff under sorcery. Well, to explain it for those of you who don't know, we've explained it in different teachings, but you know, we'll repeat stuff on here. It happens all the time. We repeat stuff all the time. Sorcery, the root word of sorcery is for sorcery is pharmakia. Pharmakia, that's where we get the word pharmacy and pharmaceuticals. That's the connection a lot of people don't understand, is that it was a change in word. They started using pharmakia and pharmaceuticals, and then people started saying, oh, well, you know, what does that have to do with sorcery? Well, just because you change the word doesn't mean that there's a disconnection of the problem, because this is what the witches and these kind of people would do, the necromancers, the diviners, the people like that in the Bible. And there are plenty of verses. Just look up the word sorcerer anywhere in the Scripture, and you're going to find all sorts of things. God says it's an abomination to him, anybody that practices witchcraft, divination. That's all the mediums and things like that. They're practicing divination and necromancy and things like that. All that stuff. And by the way, they do use drugs, and they do use certain things like that to try to get into their trances. All that stuff is an abomination against God. The Bible says very clearly that he hates those things. But there's a big difference between, you know, using using these things like creating an oil out of seeds. There's a big difference between that and then trying to smoking something and trying to get high from it, and thinking that this is going to bring you some sort of special benefit out of those things. Because like I've said before, even witches get benefits out of what they're doing. I mean, when they make their sacrifices and they do things to the devil, they do get benefits. The devil blesses them with certain things, with certain riches, with certain things that they want. But they're selling their soul for that stuff. And so we Christians ought to sanctify ourselves. So I was just trying to answer that point. Sorry, Josh, you can go on if you want to.
All right. So it continues. It says, the research team led by first author Anastasia B. Evanoff sent surveys to medical schools, curriculum deans at 172 medical schools in North America, including 31 that specialize in osteopathic medicine, and received 101 replies. Two-thirds, 66.7%, reported that their graduates were not prepared to prescribe medical marijuana. A quarter of deans said their trainees weren't even equipped to answer questions about medical marijuana. The researchers also surveyed 258 residents and fellows who earned their medical degrees from schools around the country before coming to Washington University School of Medicine and Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis to complete their training. Nearly 90% felt they weren't prepared to prescribe medical marijuana, and 85% said they had not received any education about medical marijuana during their time at medical schools or in residencies programs throughout the country. Using data from the AAMC database, the researchers found that only 9% of medical schools had reported teaching their students about medical marijuana. As a future physician, it worries me, said Evanoff, a third-year medical student. We need to know how to answer questions about medical marijuana's risks and benefits, but there is a fundamental mismatch between laws involving marijuana and the education physicians in training receive at medical schools.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. They are now manufacturing an artificial form of medicinal cannabis, and this will change. This will change without doubt. To smoke or not to smoke, that's not even the question here. What is the question is, how soon are they going to change it now that the drug companies are manufacturing an artificial form of cannabis?
I've heard about some of those, some of the experiments on the artificially produced stuff, and from what I've heard, it's killing people.
Yes, there have been several deaths from what I've seen on the cannabis that's been manufactured in a lab. And it just goes to show that there's really no way to mimic what God has created. I don't care what herb you're talking about, whether it be cannabis or parsley or oregano. You cannot do artificial and expect it to be as good and as safe. There's just no way.
Well, there again, they have the people that I've heard some of these hypocrites before, where I think it was Genesis 1:29. I've seen some hypocrites before who come out and they like to get high, they smoke marijuana, they like to get high, and they come out with Genesis 1:29. They said, "Oh, God said that all herbs were good to eat and good for consumption." First of all, and number one, if you read the verse, it said good for consumption, not for smoking. Number one. Number two, it doesn't mean every herb everywhere of all things in all places. It doesn't mean every single last thing. It means that which is good for the consumption he's created for those specific purposes. And it may have been that even in the beginning that all of them were good for consumption, but then after the fall, now when the thistles and the thorns grow and things like that in Genesis chapter 3, now we've got a problem to where we've got other things that will be harmful to us, which probably makes more sense in my opinion. So, but like I said, I wasn't there. I don't know what it was like before Because as Peter said, he says the world before the flood perished. So I don't know what things were like even before the flood, let alone what it was like in the Garden of Eden. So I can't say for certain all these things, but it would make sense under them that's when, the thorns and thistles grow and the things that are not so good for us start to come out. And so some of these people, they think, oh, well, we can do anything we want by, we can smoke all this stuff if we want. Doesn't matter what God says. Well, then why don't you go smoke poison ivy? Go smoke some poison oak. See what happens to you. Well, that doesn't make you feel as good. So why isn't that, what are you really arguing for here? You just want the good feeling. It doesn't matter what God says. And that's my point, is that people don't want to stay under the authority of God in some of this stuff. And so I didn't mean to take it too far off what you guys are saying, because I know your point bringing up was they're making artificial stuff now.
However, several states, Missouri among them, have not legalized medical marijuana, and published studies about potential risks and benefits of medical marijuana often are contradictory. So what are schools to teach? You addressed the controversy, said co-investor Caroline DeVault, PhD, Assistant Dean for Education at Washington University and an instructor in medicine. You say, this is what we know, and you guide students to the points of controversy. You also point out where there may be research opportunities. The authors argue that as more states legalize marijuana for medical and recreational use, doctors need to have at least enough training to answer these patients' questions. More medical students are now getting better training about opioids, for example, said Evanoff. We talk about how some of those drugs can affect every organ system in the body, and we learn how to discuss the risks and benefits with patients. But if a patient were to ask about medical marijuana, most beneficial students would know what to say. Oh, sorry, wouldn't know what to say. Yeah. But if a patient were to ask about medical marijuana, most medical students wouldn't know what to say, and that's the end of the article. And I have a idea. See, some people are saying that alcohol, I'm sure you've heard this, how they say small amounts of alcohol or wine are healthy for you, just in moderation. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's true, but let's just say it was true. It's like, that doesn't make it okay to drink alcohol now that it can be beneficial for you. So I see that as the same way as marijuana. That's just a little connection I came up with. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I'd like your feedback if you had any.
Well, again, like I said, it's an herb like any other herb. I wouldn't go out and necessarily smoke the oregano in my garden, but, I would eat it. And I think that, used wisely, cannabis can be extremely healing. And, like I said, smoke it, don't smoke it. A lot of people I know have had trouble smoking it. Fine. You know what? There are great tinctures out there. They make tinctures from all kinds of different herbs, not just cannabis. And I think that the tinctures can be very beneficial. The oils can be very beneficial. I have a cabinet full of essential oils made from all kinds of different herbs. And do I ever buy cannabis oil? You bet. I do. And it can be extremely healing. It's a wonderful product. So, it's just coming down to, my big fear is with the artificial stuff coming out. They're very dangerous. There's just no way to mimic what God has created. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to mimic what God has created so they can patent it. And they're not succeeding. It's killing people. It's not a good idea.
And the only argument I would have with what Tanya said is I would not tell people to use them wisely. I would say use them biblically, because the wisdom will come with that. Okay, if we fear God first, we'll have the wisdom and understanding in order to how to use these things. I'm not saying that, I'm not talking about wisdom in general, but there's a wisdom of the world and there's a wisdom of God. Okay, And I'm talking from the spiritual sense that we need to use things biblically. And so just like Tanya was talking about, or I was talking about, we got seeds, we got oils, we got things like that that we can consume, we can use. All that stuff can be verified biblically. We can do those kind of things, and they are good for us. I mean, I don't have any problem with somebody buying cannabis oil and using it, or buying cannabis seeds and eating that kind of stuff, because it like we were talking about the hemp and all that kind of stuff. I have no problem with any of that stuff. What I have a problem with is people that are using it and smoking it for the purposes they're using it for. I don't think it's necessary. I think there's other options, many other options. And the bottom line is that a lot of people, if we take a look at the mass majority of Americans who are given permission to use medical marijuana, what are they given permission to use it for? Anybody know?
It's usually illnesses having to do with the brain. So mental illness is frequently prescribed. Cancer patients are frequently prescribed. People with seizures are frequently prescribed. It depends on what state you live in, though, too, because here in Indiana, it's illegal. So, of course, we're not going to be able to access it here. But states like California, Maine, Colorado, they all can use it legally.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree there. Somebody look it up and you verify it for me and tell me if I'm wrong. Cancer is the #1 thing, because you see, the cancer patients far outweigh people with just brain abnormalities and things like that, because cancer is far more common, and that's what people commonly get it used for. It's a self-induced problem. There's other issues of the body, but a lot of these brain injuries and things like that, a lot of this has come from self-induced things. A lot of the brain stuff has come from self-induced things. And if it even wasn't the person themselves, they were born with it, it's because their parents did something. Now, we don't know whether, again, these are one of those things we've talked about, some of the statistics we've heard in these articles before, where we can't tell what was the diet of their parents the whole time. What was what did they do? Did they smoke things? What kind of chemicals were they around that were harmful to them? What all the things that were doing that were causing this stuff to happen in the first place? So we can't tell that. And so what I'm saying is that I firmly believe a lot of this is self-induced. A lot. I'm not saying all of it is, and that there's not just accidents and things like that that happen. I understand that, but a lot of it, and the majority of it's self-induced. If we get rid of all the thing with the self-induced issue in the medical marijuana stuff, you're not going to have much of an industry there in the first place. And again, I would say there's many other areas you could put this into, that kind of money into, but they're not going to do it because there are people right now, major companies, who are seeking to have a monopoly on marijuana. Because as right now, marijuana, it's illegal in the United States. And so the problem is that a lot of people, all the different drug runners and people like that, those kind of people are already set up to sell it. If it were made illegal tomorrow, you'd have a bunch of new companies popping up where all these people that are the illegal, criminals would now be legal, and that because a lot of these guys, most people don't know, they have corporate meetings. Criminals have corporate meetings. They think criminals, it's these guys just hiding it in their jackets and everything. No. There is a structure to these things. These guys have their own industries. They have their own bodyguards. They have secretaries. This is not something just because it's the underworld doesn't mean they don't have a business structure similar to what you have in the legal capitalist system, okay? And they have turfs. They have areas. They have things they have to work out amongst each other. It happens. And sometimes it happens in blood, all right, because they kill each other over this stuff. But the problem is that the major companies that legally who work in lobbying the government, they don't want these guys to raise up and take away the profits they could have for themselves. So you've got to carefully monitor this as the society slowly transitions into, because guys, can you foresee a situation where this is not going to happen? Where they're not eventually going to make marijuana legal? I fully predict this is going to happen. And Christians can pray against it. That's probably the best you can do on the subject. It's probably going to happen because that's the way our society is going. But not that I'm saying it's right, but that's probably going to happen. But what needs to happen is all the patents need to be laid out. All the monopolies need to be laid out, where the government's only going to allow you to purchase from certain people because they've got the government set up that way so they can protect their own industries. And who knows, maybe there are some criminal organizations who are working with the government now to try to get that done. We don't even know if that's the case, since the CIA has been involved in a lot of this. So there's a lot of things that we don't know and misinformation is going around about this that we need to stop and take into consideration before you jump the gun to say what's right or wrong in this issue. We just need to consider scripture in all this and also realize that there's a lot that we don't know.
So we're all out of, or we're done with our articles for today. So you can keep talking if you want. If you have nothing to say, then I suppose if you have no more to say, I'll close. Then, okay. Thank you, everybody who has joined us here this day for watching us. And if you want to get to know us, you can join the forum, and you can do that by clicking the link in the description, which takes you to the forum. You can introduce yourself on there. You can even make comments on the video and read other comments by clicking that same link that takes you to the forum. So keep that in mind, and Lord willing, we're going to see you next week.